James Wilson, a 65-year-old black disabled Army veteran, had served his country proudly during the Vietnam War before an explosion changed his life forever. The blast had torn through his right leg, leaving it virtually useless despite multiple surgeries and years of physical therapy. His left leg had fared better but couldn't support his weight for more than a few minutes at a time. After being honorably discharged with a Purple Heart, James had to adjust to a new reality, life in a wheelchair. While he kept a cane for short distances in familiar settings, his wheelchair had become his primary means of mobility. It had taken him years to accept this new normal, but James had eventually found his stride. Just last month he'd finally saved enough from his retirement pension and VA benefits to move to Oakwood Estates, a quieter neighborhood with wider sidewalks and better accessibility. His single-story home had been modified with ramps and widened doorways, making it perfect for his needs. James had been hopeful that this move would mark a peaceful retirement, a place where he could focus on enjoying his senior years rather than the injuries of his past. Little did he know that his peaceful new beginning would be shattered in the most unexpected and cruel way. On a crisp Saturday morning, James decided to explore the neighborhood park just 2 blocks from his new home. The park boasted paved pathways that were perfect for his wheelchair, and he was looking forward to some fresh air. Navigating through the entrance, James smiled as he took in the sight of families enjoying the day. Children were laughing on the playground while parents chatted nearby. Several joggers passed by, offering friendly nods. For the first time since moving in, James felt like part of the community. He wheeled himself to a sunny bench overlooking a small pond where ducks swam lazily across the water. With some effort, James managed to transfer himself from his wheelchair to the bench, wanting to feel the warmth of the sun directly. He carefully positioned his wheelchair just beside the bench within arm's reach. As James closed his eyes to enjoy the moment of peace, he didn't notice a middle-aged white woman and her adult son approaching. They had been watching him since he entered the park. "Excuse me," came a sharp voice, cutting through his moment of tranquility. James opened his eyes to see a woman in her late 50s standing over him, arms crossed and lips pursed into a thin line. Her son, a heavy-set man in his 30s, stood slightly behind her with a similar look of contempt. "Yes, ma'am? Can I help you?" James responded politely, straightening up on the bench. "I've been watching you," the woman said, her voice dripping with accusation. "You just got up and sat on this bench. You're not really disabled, are you?" James was taken aback. "I beg your pardon? You people are always gaming the system," she continued, her voice getting louder. "Taking up handicapped parking, getting special benefits. My taxes pay for your free wheelchair, don't they?" Several nearby park-goers turned to look at the commotion. James felt his face growing hot with embarrassment and anger. "Ma'am, I served this country for 20 years. This injury happened in Vietnam," James explained, trying to keep his voice calm despite the woman's increasingly aggressive tone. "Sure you did," she scoffed, looking to her son who snickered in response. "Ryan, look at this fraud. Bet he can get up and dance if he wanted to." James reached for his military ID in his pocket. "I can show you my veterans." Before he could finish his sentence, the woman suddenly lunged forward, shoving James hard in the chest. Caught off guard and off balance, James toppled backward off the bench, landing hard on the ground with a painful thud. "Mom's right," Ryan said with a smirk. "Let's see how disabled you really are." With that, he grabbed James's wheelchair and began wheeling it away. "Hey, stop. That's my wheelchair," James called out, trying to pull himself up but failing without support. "If you're really disabled, you won't be able to follow us, will you?" the woman taunted, walking alongside her son as they quickly moved away with James's wheelchair. James was left sprawled on the ground, unable to stand, watching helplessly as they disappeared with his only means of mobility. The pain in his legs flared as he tried to shift his position, and for the first time in years he felt completely vulnerable and exposed. Several shocked onlookers stared in disbelief at what had just transpired, momentarily frozen by the brazen cruelty they had witnessed. "Oh my God, did you see that?" A teenage girl with bright pink hair stood nearby, her phone raised as she recorded the final moments of the confrontation. "I got it all on video." An elderly couple who had been feeding ducks at the pond hurried over to James as quickly as they could. The man, using a walking cane himself, knelt down with effort beside James. "Son, are you all right?" the elderly man asked, his voice filled with concern. "What those people did, it's just despicable." "Thank you," James managed, his voice tight with pain and humiliation. Decades of military discipline couldn't hide the emotion in his eyes. "I'll be okay." The elderly woman placed a gentle hand on James's shoulder. My husband Frank is right. That was horrible. I'm Margaret and we're going to help you. By now, a small crowd had gathered. A young mother with a stroller stepped forward. That woman lives in the blue house on Maple Street. I've seen her yelling at the mail carrier before. Her name's Karen Henderson. Someone call the police, Frank urged, looking around at the gathering crowd. A jogger already had his phone out. I'm on it. This is assault and theft. James tried to maintain his dignity despite being splayed on the ground like a turtle on its back. The hard pavement pressed painfully against his bad hip, and the frustration of being so helpless in public was almost worse than the physical discomfort. The teenage girl approached, lowering her phone. Sir, I recorded most of what happened. That lady pushed you and they took your wheelchair. I have it all here. She turned her phone screen toward James, showing him the video of Karen's assault. Thank you, young lady, James said, his voice steadier now. That might be helpful. As they waited for the police, more people from the park came to offer assistance. Someone brought a bottle of water. Another person offered a jacket to place under James's head. A park maintenance worker came running with a first aid kit. I'm a nurse, said a woman in her 40s, kneeling beside James. Let me check you over while we wait for the police. Did you hit your head when you fell? No, my pride took most of the damage, James replied with a weak smile, trying to maintain some semblance of humor despite the situation. In the distance, sirens could be heard approaching. James closed his eyes briefly, fighting back a wave of emotion. In all his years, through war, through injury, through the difficult adjustment to civilian life with a disability, he had never felt so utterly violated. The casual cruelty and racism he had just experienced cut deeper than he wanted to admit. The police are here, someone announced as two patrol cars pulled up to the park entrance with lights flashing. As the officers approached, James couldn't help but feel a flash of anxiety. As a black man, even one in his 60s, interactions with police always carried an extra layer of tension. But as the first officer, a young black woman, knelt beside him with genuine concern, that anxiety began to fade. Sir, I'm Officer Taylor. Can you tell me what happened here? She asked, her voice professional but kind. The teenage girl stepped forward, phone in hand. I have it all on video, officer. Let's get you some help first, sir, Officer Taylor said, nodding to her partner. Ambulance is on the way to check you out. I don't need an ambulance, James insisted, his military stoicism kicking in. I need my wheelchair back. The second officer, a tall man with graying hair, knelt down. We'll get your property back, sir. Can you describe the individuals who took it? As James described Karen and her son Ryan, the teenage girl showed the officers her video. Officer Taylor's expression hardened as she watched. That's assault, plain and simple, she said, standing up. And theft of medical equipment. Matthews, stay with Mr. Wilson. I'm going to that house on Maple. The teenager with pink hair stepped forward. I can show you exactly which house. I've seen them yelling at delivery people before. I'm coming too, said the young mother who had identified Karen earlier. That's my neighbor and I'm sick of her bullying everyone. While Officer Matthews stayed with James, Officer Taylor and 3 witnesses headed toward Karen's house. Within minutes, a second police car and an ambulance arrived at the park. James reluctantly allowed the paramedics to check his vitals and examine his legs for new injuries. His right leg was already showing signs of bruising from the fall. At Karen's house, Officer Taylor rang the doorbell. Through the decorative glass panels, she could see movement inside but no one came to answer. After a second, more insistent ring, the door finally opened. Karen stood in the doorway, her demeanor completely transformed. Gone was the aggressive woman from the park, replaced by someone feigning confusion and innocence. Officer? Is something wrong? Karen asked sweetly. Ma'am, we've received reports of an assault and theft at the park involving you and a young man. Would that be your son? Karen's face hardened instantly. That black man was harassing me and my son. We felt threatened. Officer Taylor remained professional despite the obvious lie. Ma'am, we have video evidence showing you pushing a disabled veteran to the ground and your son taking his wheelchair. Where is that wheelchair now? He's not really disabled, Karen spat, dropping her facade. He got up just fine at the park. These people are always faking for benefits and special treatment. At that moment, a garage door opened and Ryan appeared, attempting to back his car out. Through the open garage, Officer Taylor could clearly see James's wheelchair pushed against the wall. Stop that vehicle. Officer Taylor commanded, signaling to the officers in the second patrol car. They quickly blocked Ryan's car. You can't come onto my property. Karen shrieked, her face contorting with anger. We didn't do anything wrong. That man was faking. Ryan stepped out of his car, fists clenched. We were just teaching him a lesson. People like him get everything handed to them. Sir, step away from the vehicle, an officer ordered as he approached Ryan. You're under arrest for theft and accessory to assault. You're arresting me? For what? Ryan shouted, his face reddening. Because some old black guy fell down at the park? This is harassment. As the officers moved to handcuff Ryan, Karen lunged forward, attempting to interfere. Get your hands off my son. We're the victims here. Ma'am, step back or you'll be arrested for obstruction as well, Officer Taylor warned. Karen ignored the warning, continuing to scream racist obscenities. This wouldn't be happening if he was white. You're only doing this because he's black. That's enough, Officer Taylor said firmly, motioning to her colleague. You're under arrest for assault, theft of medical equipment, and obstruction of justice. As both Karen and Ryan were being handcuffed, the teenage girl held up her phone. I got this all on video too, officer. Karen's face went pale when she realized she was being recorded again. You can't film me? That's illegal. Actually, ma'am, it's perfectly legal to record in public spaces, Officer Taylor informed her as she led Karen to the patrol car. An officer retrieved James's wheelchair from the garage and wheeled it toward the park, where James was still waiting, now sitting on a bench with the help of the paramedics and kind strangers. When James saw his wheelchair being wheeled back toward him, a wave of relief washed over his weathered face. The officer pushing it approached with respect. Mr. Wilson, we've recovered your property, the officer said. And I'm pleased to inform you that both suspects are in custody. The paramedics helped James transfer back into his wheelchair, the familiar seat bringing an immediate sense of autonomy that he'd been stripped of during the incident. Thank you, James said, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil of the past hour. I appreciate everyone's help today. Officer Taylor returned to the park after ensuring Karen and Ryan were secured in separate patrol cars. Mr. Wilson, we'll need you to come to the station to provide a formal statement when you're feeling up to it. Both suspects are being charged with assault and theft. Given the nature of the incident and the video evidence, we're also recommending hate crime enhancements to the prosecutor. The teenage girl with pink hair approached tentatively. Sir, I posted the video online, she admitted. I hope that's okay. People need to see what happened. James nodded slowly. If it helps prevent this from happening to someone else, then I'm glad you did. Within hours, the video had gone viral. Local news stations picked up the story, running headlines about a disabled veteran being assaulted and robbed of his wheelchair. By evening, James's phone was ringing constantly with calls from reporters and well-wishers. The next morning, a representative from the local Veterans Affairs office arrived at James's home. Mr. Wilson, the community is outraged by what happened to you, the VA representative explained. A local medical supply company wants to donate a new top-of-the-line wheelchair. And several veterans organizations are organizing a support rally this weekend. James sat in his living room, overwhelmed by the response. I never wanted this kind of attention, he said quietly. You may not have wanted it, sir, but your dignity in the face of such cruelty has touched a lot of people. You're reminding the community what it means to serve with honor. Later that week, as James gave his formal statement at the police station, he learned that Karen had been fired from her job at a local insurance company after her employers saw the viral video. Ryan, who was already on probation for a previous assault charge, was facing serious jail time. The district attorney personally assured James that she would be prosecuting the case to the fullest extent of the law. We won't tolerate hate crimes in this county, Mr. Wilson, especially not against someone who served our country. 1 month after the incident, James sat in his new high-tech wheelchair at the community center where a forum on discrimination against disabled veterans was taking place. The room was packed with community members, veterans, and advocates. When it was his turn to speak, James wheeled himself to the front of the room. The audience fell silent. I never expected to become the face of this issue, James began, his deep voice carrying through the room. For 40 years after Vietnam, I tried to live quietly and with dignity. What happened to me in that park could have left me bitter. Instead, it's given me purpose. He paused, looking out at the diverse faces before him. Karen and Ryan Henderson were sentenced yesterday. She received 18 months probation and 200 hours of community service working with disabled veterans. Her son is serving 12 months in county jail, given his prior record. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some might say justice was served, James continued. But true justice isn't about punishment. It's about change. Since that day, 3 businesses in our town have improved their wheelchair accessibility. Our police department has implemented new training on handling hate crimes. And I've received letters from veterans across the country who've faced similar discrimination but stayed silent. James adjusted his glasses and leaned forward slightly. Racism and ableism often hide behind smiles in nice neighborhoods. They lurk in assumptions about who deserves respect and who doesn't. But what I've learned is that for every Karen Henderson in this world, there are dozens of good people willing to stand up and do what's right. He gestured to the teenage girl with pink hair sitting in the front row. Like this young lady who recorded the incident. Or the elderly couple who came to my aid. Or Officer Taylor who took immediate action. Our character isn't defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond, and how we treat each other. As James concluded his remarks, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Several Vietnam veterans in attendance rendered sharp salutes. Later, as people filed out, the teenage girl approached James. "My school project on local heroes is due next week," she said, smiling. "Would it be okay if it was about you?" James chuckled and shook his head. "I'm no hero, young lady. I'm just an old soldier who refused to stay down when someone pushed him." As he wheeled himself home that evening, James reflected on how a single act of hatred had ultimately revealed so much compassion in his new community. His wheelchair, once just a necessary tool, now felt like a symbol of resilience. A reminder that dignity can't be stolen, even when mobility is temporarily taken away. The path ahead would have its challenges, but James Wilson faced it with the same courage that had carried him through war, injury, and now this unexpected battle on the home front. He was no longer just a resident of Oakwood Estates. He was a respected member of a community that had chosen to stand against hate when it mattered most.